Salford is a town lying at the heart of the City of Salford, a metropolitan borough of Greater Manchester, in North West England. Salford is sited in a meander of the River Irwell, which forms in part its boundary with the City of Manchester to the east. The Salford wards of Broughton and Kersal are on the other side of the river. Together with its neighbouring towns to the west, Salford forms the local government district of the City of Salford, which is administered from Swinton. The former county borough of Salford, which included Broughton, Pendleton and Kersal, was granted honorific city status in 1926. It has a resident population of 103,886 and occupies an area of 8.1 square miles. The wider City of Salford district has a population of 219,200. Historically in Lancashire, Salford's early history is marked by its status as a royal caput and the judicial seat of the ancient hundred of Salfordshire, to which it lent its name. It was granted a charter by Ranulph de Blondeville, 6th Earl of Chester, in about 1230, making Salford a free borough. During the early stages of its growth, Salford was of greater cultural and commercial importance than its neighbour Manchester, although most contemporary sources agree that since the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries that position has been reversed. Salford became a major factory town and inland port during the 18th and 19th centuries. Cotton and silk spinning and weaving in local mills attracted an influx of families and provided Salford with a strong economy. Salford Docks was a principal dockyard of the Manchester Ship Canal. By the end of the 19th century, Salford had an enlarged working-class community and suffered from chronic overpopulation. Industrial activities declined during the 20th century, however, causing a local economic depression. Salford subsequently became one of contrasts, with regenerated inner-city areas like Salford Quays next to some of the most socially deprived and violent areas in England. Salford has become a centre of higher education, home to the University of Salford, and has seen several firsts, including the world's first unconditionally free public library, and the first street in the world to be lit by gas, Chapel Street, in 1806. Salford's Media City UK became the headquarters of CBBC and BBC Sport in 2011. History. Toponymy. The name of Salford derives from the Old English word sealfoot, meaning a ford by the willow trees. It referred to the willows or sallows that grew alongside the banks of the River Irwell. The ford was about where Victoria Bridge is today. Willow trees are still found in Lower Broughton. Salford appears in the Pipe Roll of 1169 as Salford, and in the Lancashire Inquisitions of 1226 as Sainford. Early history. The earliest known evidence of human activity in what is now Salford is provided by the Neolithic flint arrowheads and workings, discovered on Kersal Moor and the River Irwell, suggesting that the area was inhabited 7–10,000 years ago. The raw material for such tools was scarce and unsuitable for working, and as a result they are not of the quality found elsewhere. Other finds include a Neolithic axe hammer found near Modewell during the excavation of the Manchester Ship Canal in 1890, and a Bronze Age cremation urn during the construction of a road on the Broughton Hall estate in 1873. The Brigands were the major Celtic tribe in what is now northern England, with a stronghold at the sandstone outcrop on which Manchester Cathedral now stands opposite Salford's original centre. The territory extended across the fertile lowland by the River Irwell that is now Salford and Stretford. Following the Roman conquest of Britain, General Agricola ordered the construction of a Roman fort named Mamucium to protect the routes to Deva Victrix and Eboracum from the Brigands. The fort was completed in AD 79, and for over 300 years the Pax Romana brought peace to the area. Both the main Roman Roman road to the north, from Mamusium to Ribchester, and a second road to the west, ran through what is now Salford, but few Roman artifacts have been found in the area. The withdrawal of the Romans in AD 410 left the inhabitants at the mercy of the Saxons. The Danes later conquered the area and absorbed what was left of the brigands. Angles settled in the region during the early Middle Ages and gave the locality the name Sealford, meaning ford by the willows. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Sealford was part of the Kingdom of Northumbria until it was conquered in 923 by Edward the Elder. Following the emergence of the United Kingdom of England, Salford became a caput of central manor within a broad rural area in part held by the kings of England, including Edward the Confessor. The area between the rivers Mersey and Ribble was divided into 6 smaller districts, referred to as oapentakes, or hundreds. The southeast district became known as the Hundred of Salford, a division of land administered from Salford for military and judicial purposes. It contained 9 large parishes, smaller parts of 2 others, and the township of Aspel in the parish of Wigan. After the defeat of the Harold II during the Norman conquest of England, William I granted the Hundred of Salford to Roger the Poitevin, and in the Domesday Book of 1086 the Hundred of Salford was recorded as covering an area of 350 square miles with a population of 35,000. Poitevin created the subordinate manor of Manchester out of the hundred, which has since in local government been separate from Salford. Poitevin forfeited the manor in 1102 when he was defeated in a failed rebellion attempt against Henry I. In around 1115, for the support during the rebellion, Henry I placed the Hundred of Salford under the control of the Earldom of Lancaster, and it is from this exchange that the Hundred of Salford became a royal manor. The lord of the manor was either the English monarch or a feudal landowner who administered the manor for the king. During the reign of Henry II, the royal manor of Salford passed to Ranulph de Gernon, 4th Earl of Chester. Salford began to emerge as a small town early in the 13th century. In 1228, Henry III granted the caput of Salford the right to hold a market and an annual fair. The fairs were important to the town. A 17th-century order forced each burgess, a freeman of the borough, to attend, but the fairs were abolished during the 19th century. The Earls of Chester aided the development of the caput, and in 1230 Ranulph de Blondeville, 6th Earl of Chester, made Salford a burgage, or free borough. The charter gave its burgess certain commercial rights, privileges and advantages over traders living outside Salford. One of the 26 clauses of the charter stated that no one could work in the Hundred of Salford unless they also lived in the borough. Salford's status as a burgage encouraged an influx of distinguished families, and by the late Middle Ages Salford was rich in its manor houses, with over 30 within a 5-mile radius of Ordsall. These included Ordsall Hall and Broughton Hall, owned by the Earls of Derby. During the Civil War of 1640–49, Salford supported the Royalist cause, in contrast to Manchester just across the Irwell, which declared in favour of the Parliamentarians. Royalist forces mounted a siege of Manchester across what is now the site of Victoria Bridge, which, although short-lived, did little to improve relations between the two towns. A century later, in 1745, Salford was staunchly in support of Bonnie Prince Charlie in his attempt to seize the throne of England. He entered the town at the head of his army and was blessed by the Reverend John Clayton before leaving in high spirits to march on London. He returned to Salford in defeat just 9 days later. Industrial Revolution. Salford has a history of textile processing that predates the Industrial Revolution, and as an old town had been developing for for about 700 years. Before the introduction of cotton, there was a considerable trade in woolen goods and fustians. Other cottage industries prevalent at this time included clogging, cobbling, weaving and brewing. The changes to textile manufacture during the Industrial Revolution had a profound effect on both population and urbanization, as well as the socio-economic and cultural conditions of Salford. The well-established textile processing and trading infrastructure, and the ready supply of water from the River Irwell and its tributaries, attracted entrepreneurs who built cotton mills along the banks of the river in Pendleton and Ordsall. Although Salford followed a similar pattern of industrial development to Manchester, most businesses preferred to build the premises on the Manchester side of the Irwell, and consequently Salford did not develop as a commercial centre in the same way as its neighbour. Many of these earlier mills had been based on arkwright-type designs. These relied on strong falls of water, but Salford is on a meander of the Irwell with only a slight gradient, and thus mills tended to be built upstream, at Kersal and Pendleton. With the introduction of the steam engine in the late 18th century, however, merchants began to construct mills closer to the centres of Salford and Manchester, where supplies of labour and coal were more readily available. One of the first factories to be built was Phillips & Lee's Twist Mill in Salford, completed in 1801. The second iron-framed multi-storey building to be erected in Britain, the large Salford Engine Twist Company Mill, was built to the west of Salford, between Chapel Street and the Irwell, and in 1806 was the first large cotton mill to use gas lighting. It was however outnumbered by the numerous smaller factories and mills throughout the area, including Nath and Goff's steam-driven mule spinning mill, near Oldfield Road, where a serious accident occurred on the 13th of October 1824. Canal building provided a further stimulus for Salford's industrial development. The opening of the Bridgewater Canal in 1761 improved the transport of fuel and raw materials, reducing the price of coal by about 50%. The later Manchester, Bolton and Ampbury Canal brought more cheap coal from pits at Pendleton, Agecroft Colliery and beyond. By 1818 Manchester, Salford and Eccles had about 80 mills, but it was the completion of the Manchester Ship Canal in 1894 which triggered Salford's development as a major inland port. Salford Docks, a major dockland on the Ship Canal 35 miles east of the Irish Sea, brought employment to over 3,000 labourers. By 1914 the Port of Manchester, most of whose docks were in Salford, had become one of the largest port authorities in the world, handling 5% of the UK's imports and 4.4% of its exports. Commodities handled included cotton, grain, wool, textile machinery, and steam locomotives. For centuries, textiles and related trades were the main source of employment in the town. Bleaching was a widely distributed finishing trade in Salford, carried over from the earlier woolen industry. In the 18th century, before the introduction of chemical bleaching, bleaching fields were commonplace, some very close to the town. In 1773 there were 25 bleachers around Salford, most to the west of the township. Printing was another source of trade. The earliest recorded in the region was a calic printer in the Manchester Parish Register of 1763. These industries became more important as Salford faced increasing competition from the nearby towns of Bolton and Oldham. As its cotton spinning industries faltered, its economy turned increasingly to other textiles and to the finishing trades, including rixine and silk dyeing, and fulling and bleaching, at a string of works in Salford. Both Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels spent time in Salford, studying the plight of the British working class. In The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, Engels described Salford as really one large working-class quarter, very unhealthy, dirty and dilapidated district which, while other industries were almost always textile-related, is situated opposite the Old Church of Manchester. Salford developed several civic institutions. In 1806, Chapel Street became the first street in the world to be lit by gas. In 1850, under the terms of the Museums Act 1845, the Municipal Borough Council established the Royal Museum and Public Library, said to have been the first unconditional free public library in England, preceding the Public Libraries Act 1850. The effect on Salford of the Industrial Revolution has been described as phenomenal. The area expanded from a small market town into a major industrial metropolis, factories replaced cottage industries, and the population rose from 12,000 in 1812 to 70,244 within 30 years. By the end of the 19th century it had increased to 220,000. Large-scale building of low-quality Victorian terraced housing did not stop overcrowding, which itself led to chronic social deprivation. The density of housing was as high as 80 homes per acre. Private roads were built for the use of the middle classes moving to the outskirts of Salford. The entrances to such roads, which included Elleray Road in Earlham's Th Height, were often gated and patrolled. Post-industrial decline during the early 20th century. Improvements in regional transport infrastructure precipitated the decline of Salford's existing industries, including those at the Salford docks. Increased foreign competition began to undermine the competitiveness of local textile processing businesses. Rising unemployment during the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s, and a significant economic decline in the decades following the Second World War contributed toward a fall in Salford's population. By 1939 local coal mining had almost stopped, and cotton spinning had by 1971 ceased completely. Between 1921 and 1939, the population of Salford decreased by 29%, from 234,045 to 166,386, far greater than the rate of decline within the whole of North West England. A survey in 1931 concluded that parts of Salford contained some of the worst slums in the country. Many houses were infested by rats and lacked elementary amenities. Inspectors found that of 950 houses surveyed, 257 were in a state of bad repair with leaking roofs, broken flooring and rotten woodwork. The inspectors were struck by the courage and perseverance with which the greater number of tenants kept the houses clean and respectable under most adverse conditions. By 1933 slum clearance projects were underway, and by the end of 1956 over 1,000 families had been rehoused in overspill estates at Little Hulton. These clearances have, for some, changed the character of the area to such an extent that observers in search of the typical Salford may have to look in Eccles and Swinton, for much of the community and townscape has gone from Salford, replaced by tall blocks of flats. Large areas of the city were redeveloped in the 1960s and 1970s with Victorian-era terraced housing estates that inspired painter L.S. Lowry and soap opera Coronation Street, giving way to concrete tower blocks and austere architecture. Life in Salford during the early 20th century was described by Robert Roberts in his study The Classic Slum. Despite extensive redevelopment throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the area experienced chronic poverty, deprivation and unemployment. This social deprivation led to increased levels of gang crime linked to illegal narcotics, firearms and robberies. Organized crime in Salford, particularly particularly in Ordsall and Pendleton, began to have a disturbing effect on grassroots democracy. Both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives announced they would not contest certain Salford wards because they regarded them as unsafe and would put their party workers at risk. Salford's social amenities and the nighttime economy folded amid criminal intimidation, drug use, fights and demands for money. In early 2005, the government of Latvia appealed to the European Union to advise people against travelling to Salford after a Latvian peopleman was stabbed in the head in Lower Broughton. However, a crackdown by Greater Manchester Police coupled with investment in and structural changes to the housing stock began the change in Salford's fortunes. Population decline has slowed, and Salford city councillors have insisted it is a safe place to visit. In August 2005, a survey by Channel 4 television rated the city as the 9th worst place to live in the United Kingdom, based on criteria of crime, education, environment, lifestyle and employment. Regeneration. Salford has suffered from high levels of unemployment and housing and social problems since around the 1960s. Although there are regeneration schemes to reverse its fortunes, many of the high-rise housing blocks from the 1960s and 1970s were demolished during the 1990s, a sign that the great social engineering schemes had failed. However, the high-rises that remain are a striking feature of Salford's landscape. Work was scheduled to begin on the £180 million redevelopment of the Greengate area of Salford in January 2007. The plans include the construction of what will be the 2 tallest tower blocks in Salford. Plans also include a 5-star hotel, a new public square and park, restaurants, cafes and 403 apartments. Work is ongoing to regenerate the area known as Middlewood Locks, with the restored Salford terminus of the Manchester Bolton and Amp-Berry Canal forming the centrepiece of a brand new residential development. As part of the Pathfinder initiative, Salford was identified in 2002 as one of 9 areas in specific need of investment for new homes. Between 2003 and 2006, £115 million was invested in the Manchester and City of Salford housing markets, £44 million of which was invested in central Salford. Rows of terraces in neighbourhoods such as Seedley and Langworthy, once used for the title sequence of Coronation Street, are being compulsorily purchased, demolished and replaced by modern sustainable accommodation. Other schemes such as the Charlestown and Lower Kersal New Deal for communities have concentrated on renovating existing terraced housing stock by block improvement and alley gating, as well as demolishing unsuitable properties and building new facilities in consultation with the local community. Salford now has many tourist attractions, such as Ordsall Hall, the Bridgewater Canal and the Lowry Centre, an award-winning theatre and art gallery complex consisting of 2 theatres and 3 art galleries. The centre is named after the artist L.S. Lowry, who attended Salford School of Art and lived in nearby Pendlebury for 40 years. Many of his paintings of Salford and Manchester mill scenes, populated with small matchstick-like figures, are on display. The waterfront development at Media City UK will make Salford a major centre of UK media production. The development houses BBC departments including CBBC, BBC Sport and Radio 5 Live, which moved in 2011, and Breakfast moved from London in spring 2012. Governance. Salford was anciently part of the Manchester parish of the Salford Hundred, an area much larger than the present-day city of Salford, within the historic county boundaries of Lancashire. A stroke of a Norman baron's pen is said to have divorced Manchester and Salford, although it was not Salford that became separated from Manchester, but Manchester, with its humbler line of lords, that was separated from Salford. Salford received its own charter from Ranulph de Blondeville, 6th Earl of Chester, then Lord of the Manor, in 1230. For then until 1791, when police commissioners were appointed, it was governed by a reeve, a medieval administrator and law enforcement official. It was not recognized as a borough in the Municipal Corporations Act 1835, but was granted borough status in 1844. The new Salford borough was made up of the township of Salford and part of Broughton. The remainder of Broughton and a part of Pendlebury were added in 1853, when the administrative county of Lancashire was created by the Local Government Act 1888. Salford was elevated to become the county borough of Salford and was, in modern terms, a unitary authority area exempt from the administration of Lancashire County Council. Following a campaign supported by William Joynson Hicks, Home Secretary and MP for a neighbouring constituency of Manchester, city status was granted to the county borough by letters patent dated the 21st of April 1926. This was in spite of the opposition of civil servants in the Home Office, who dismissed the borough as merely a scratch collection of 240,000 people cut off from Manchester by the river. In 1961, a small part of the municipal borough of Eccles was added to the city, and in 1966, Salford was twinned with Clermont-Ferrand in France. In 1974, the city and county borough of Salford was abolished under the Local Government Act 1972, and was replaced by the Metropolitan Borough of City of Salford, a local government district of the new Metropolitan County of Greater Manchester, with triple the territory of the former City of Salford, taking in neighbouring Eccles, Swinton and Pendlebury, and Worsley and Earlham. Both Salford and the wider City of Salford are unparished areas. Parliamentary representation. Salford was enfranchised as a parliamentary borough, returning a single member of Parliament by the Great Reform Act of 1832. From 1868 it returned 2 MPs to the House of Commons until the Redistribution of Seats Act 1885, when the constituency was split into 3 single-member divisions: Salford North, Salford South and Salford West. Boundaries changed again under the provisions of the Representation of the People Act 1948, when the constituencies were reorganised into Salford East and Salford West. Since 1997, Salford has lain within the reconstituted Salford parliamentary constituency. Hazel Blears, a member of the Labour Party, has been the MP for the constituency since 1997. For the general election of 2010, Salford will be part of the new constituency of Salford and Eccles. The wards of Broughton and Kersal, however, are to be part of the cross-boundary constituency of Blackley and Broughton.